Hello. Welcome to Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church, a welcoming congregation where we are here for you with open arms, regardless of who you love or what tradition you come from. My name is Tyler Weaver, and for the first time in a long time, I'm your worship associate today, along with Zachary Vinson, our minister, and our faith formation and music director, Archer Phillip, and musician Nick Coletto, who we're very glad to have with us today. I'd like to thank everyone who helped get this place ready today for the service, and especially the team working on the video and sound for our virtual broadcast. Before we move further into the service, I'd like to acknowledge that members of our congregation occupy the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Coast Salish tribes. The homelands of the Suquamish, Duwamish, Clallam, and Chimicum people were ceded under duress through the Point Elliott and Point No Point treaties. We are grateful guests on these lands and affirm indigenous sovereignty, both past and present. Cedars is committed to being a welcoming and inclusive community in all the beauty of languages, cultures, and skin tones that come together in your uniqueness. We welcome you. In all the ways you experience and express gender and the beauty of who and how you love, we welcome you. With all the religious and ethical implications of your spiritual life, we welcome you. You are invited to join us today and always with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. Now, as we head into the service, please take a deep breath, center yourself, and listen to our prelude, Handel's Harmonious Blacksmith, performed by Nick Coletto.
I had my microphone off. We had no formal announcements this morning, but I did want to reach out to and let members of the community know that I received word from Patsy Campbell's daughter this week, letting me know that she has moved down to Oregon to be near her family. Patsy says that she has long loved being a member of this community. She loved being the oldest Unitarian, as she put it, at Cedars, and said that she'll very much miss being part of this community, but where her health is at right now, she needed to be closer to where her daughter Gretchen could be more readily available. I do have an address that Gretchen provided to me that I will make sure gets included in one of the upcoming editions of the Beacon. So that way, if you would like to send a card or just a well wish to Patsy, you'll have the opportunity. So welcome. For our call to worship this morning, I want to offer some words written by my colleague, Reverend Sean Dennison. They write, "As long as we fear failure, as long as we use up vast amounts of energy trying to be perfect, absolutely and adamantly competent, we're not going to have the energy to be or become the relevant, responsive, passionate, and growing movement we yearn to be. As long as we are frozen in our tracks by fear that we might fail, or more accurately, that others might find out we fail, we are stuck thinking small, making only the safest plans that we already know will succeed. But I'm here to tell you, you might as well go ahead and plan to fail, because you're going to do it anyway. You already are. And I would like to add to these words of my colleague by inviting us into the space of worship with this invitation. Come, let us fail together. At this time, those of us gathered are invited to don our masks as we prepare to sing our opening hymn for the morning, hymn number 1028, The Fire of Commitment, found in our teal hymnal.
All right. Let me flip through. All right. So I'm going to start us off with a little drumming, and then Nick Coletto will come in on the first measure.
Guiding hands and hearts
On June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court ruled in Obergefell versus Hodges, I want to get the ring right, Obergefell versus Hodges, that the 14th Amendment requires all states to allow and recognize same-sex marriages. This was the culmination of a coordinated, years-long effort to legalize marriage between two people who are not of the same gender. That effort included state referendums, state legislatures, and state and federal courts. Here in Washington, it included a 2006 Washington State Supreme Court decision that invalidated the state's 1998 Defense of Marriage Act and held that our state constitution grants individuals in this state the right to marry someone of the same gender. I remember well the impromptu celebratory gathering to recognize the Supreme Court's ruling that day at Waterfront Park here on Bainbridge. There were about 100 of us there who came together that evening and celebrated a momentous decision that felt like it was long overdue and, frankly, common sense. It was one of the few times I can recall such a coordinated and successful effort to move a liberal agenda point forward, and it felt like proof that given enough time, the arc of the moral universe does indeed bend toward justice. I can't believe that was only 7 years ago, for a lot of reasons. Looking back now, we can see that just 10 days before that decision, Donald Trump descended his golden staircase to declare his candidacy for the president. We could discuss everything that's happened since then, globally, nationally, locally, personally. It's been a lot, more than we ever could have imagined on that sunny day in June 2015. But for now at least, I'm going to focus on the judicial system. Because, of course, Donald Trump was elected president just a year and a half later and went on to appoint 3 very conservative justices to the court, 2 of whom could have been appointed by President Obama. A few weeks ago, we saw what that means in very stark terms. In the course of 4 days, the court overruled Roe v. Wade and held that the federal Constitution does not protect the right to abortion, concluded that there's a constitutional right to carry a handgun in the streets of New York City, and severely damaged the EPA's ability to address climate change. As a lawyer who's followed the Supreme Court for a long time, I find it hard to express what a dramatic turn of events this really is. The court has been trending conservative for a long time, but this is truly a watershed moment. The fact that Justice Thomas could accurately state that the same reasoning used to overturn Roe could be used to turn over Obergefell and the right to same-sex marriage speaks volumes about how swift this change has been. This represents a crowning achievement for what I will reluctantly admit has been a brilliant, decades-long strategy to pull Congress and the courts in this country to the right. We don't have time to talk about all the aspects of it here, but it has involved using entirely legal means to slowly dominate state legislatures, aggressively gerrymander legislative districts to favor conservative candidates, cultivate a talented group of conservative young lawyers and ideologues, and elect leadership unafraid to cynically wrest control over judicial appointments. Much of this directly involved churches and religion, and it was laser focused on the goal of overturning Roe v. Wade. And it worked. When I compare this to the effort that led to the Obergefell decision on same-sex marriage, I see some interesting differences. The left's process was coordinated, which is rare for the contemporary left, but it was not focused on structural change. Instead, the movement was rooted in the idea that recognizing same-sex marriage was the right thing, legally and morally, and that it was inevitable that the courts and the public would eventually realize that same-sex marriage was and should be a protected right. And that also worked. But here we are 7 years later, and I'm wondering if the decision will last long enough that my child will be able to legally marry someone of the same gender if they so choose. I can't help but feel that this situation reveals something about liberal-minded people that we need to be honest about. We often, and I'm including myself in this, assume an optimistic and somewhat righteous stance that our principles and ideals and ideas are so correct, obvious, commonsensical, and just that it's just a matter of time until the world turns our way. Seemed like that worked for a long time. Doesn't feel that way right now. I don't claim to have the answers to the best way to turn the tide. I'm hesitant to say we should try to replicate the strategy that resulted in the reversal of Roe v. Wade. It was both cynical and exploitative of people's religious views. We need to retain our fundamental optimism and hopefulness, but we also need to tinge it with a slight dose of pragmatism. Let's get our ideas out there and let them work their magic. But let's also work to improve the chances that our ideas will become a sustainable reality. So today, I dedicate the lighting of our chalice, the symbol of our faith, to working to make our goals a reality, and not simply trusting that others will eventually come to see the world as we do. So if you'll please recite with me our affirmation. You can find it in your order of service. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be.
Today, we are going to engage in an activity called Pass It On. And for that, I need a very special prop. You may not see it now, but it'll become clear once I pull it out. All right, now you see the prop, yes. As you can see, it has a clear shape, and it's about as light or as heavy as it seems. Won't be too heavy, won't be too light. But this is our vessel. This is a special vessel. This absorbs energy and gives it back to whoever holds it. This is something you want to hold, especially because it doesn't have any germs attached to it. It's completely safe. This is a sterile vessel. So today, we are going to share some good energy with each other, and I'll give an example of how that's going to happen. I'm holding the vessel here, and I want to share the energy with all of you to take a nice walk in the park, enjoy the sunlight, walk with someone you care about. Now that energy is entering the vessel, and now to affirm it, to affirm that we pass this energy to each other, I'd like us all to say, after someone adds energy to the vessel, we all say, pass it on. So I've added energy, and you can all say, and now I'm going to pass it on. Now add something to the vessel. Pass it on. Could be something you enjoy. Do you want me to say that? Yes. Okay. Pass it on.
I would like to put in the energy for continuous good health.
Very good. Pass it on.
I will add energy of love.
Pass it on. Oh,
Being able to live healthy at an age much older than my mother or grandmother lived.
pass it on. Feel free to throw it across the room. This thing isn't going to break.
I'm not. Pass.
Pass it on.
I'd like to add an energy of those who are no longer with us.
Pass it on.
I am going to infuse this with the energy of my gratitude for living in this very special place on earth.
Pass it on.
And the energy of my young 12-year-old granddaughter who's in a soccer tournament today and working her legs up and down the field and all the energy and love that goes into young people.
Pass it on.
My energy is able to spend time with family, friends, and loved ones.
Pass it on.
I'm going to add the energy of having a really nice, cold beverage on a hot day.
Oh, yeah. Pass it on. The energy of playing video games when we get home. Pass it on. Oh, oh. Like I said, it won't break. Random acts of kindness. Pass it on.
Celebrating my husband's birthday.
Pass it on.
Energy of being together.
Pass it on.
The joy of community and being here.
Pass it on.
Kind of bouncy here.
Yeah.
I want to add the energy of gratitude.
Pass it on.
I'm going to pass on the joy of music.
Pass it on.
I'm going to pass on spirit of hope and faith for the people of Ukraine. I believe in the long run they will endure.
Pass it on. Ooh, beach on a sunny day. Pass it on.
I'm going to add the energy of caring for one another.
All right, pass it on. This was all a trick. Now I have all of your good energy, and it's all mine. No. I'm going to donate this to somewhere really, really good, and I'm going to hope it makes its way to a lot of people. But imagine this. Oh, there's one good person.
I threw out a bunch of wildflower seeds a couple months ago, whatever it was, did nothing to it, and my neighbors sit there in the middle of beautiful wildflowers the last week. So,
Pass it on. Thank you. We have added a lot of good energy to this vessel, but in ending this activity, I urge you to pass on that energy, maybe without a vessel. Spread that energy throughout your day. Take a walk with someone you care about. Eat some ice cream. Make that energy real. But I'll keep the vessel just in case. Thank you, everyone.
However you feel most comfortable, I'd like to invite you all to take a moment and feel what is supporting you. Whether it's the chair, or maybe your feet on the floor, or whatever it is. To feel that support. To take a deep breath. Letting yourself to arrive into the presence of this moment and each other. And I offer this reflection. I no longer believe that hope is enough. I've been hoping for so long now, for so many things, and yet many of these things that I've hoped for feel no closer. Or progress that was made along the way has been set back. I no longer believe that hope alone is enough. That just wishing things will bring them to be. Or that progress and perfection and progressive proclamations can go on forever in the direction driven by our thoughts. I've said this before, but I believe that we do need a prayer. But the prayer we need is not one of hope. For I no longer believe that hope alone is enough. The prayer we need is one of lament, one that names what it is we have suffered and been through. The prayer that we need is one of atonement for the part that we have played in the suffering. The reason I no longer believe in hope is it's hard to keep hoping when it seems to get us nowhere. It's hard to hope when setback is met with setback and even good news comes with a dark lining. I no longer believe that hope is enough, and so I share this lament with you and invite us into a moment of silent contemplation together. We don't know what beyond hope will get us where it is we intend to go. But I hope that together we can find the way. I now invite us into a moment of silence. Amen. I'd invite you now to please don your masks again as we prepare to sing our musical meditation of the day, hymn number 123, found in our gray hymnal, Spirit of Life.
Come unto me.
By the way, I just want to say, if you're wondering who that young man is back there with the glasses and the hat and the mask, that's Elliot Weaver. Some of you may recognize him or not. That's my son. So if you know him, say hello after the service. I'll admit there's been a few Sundays where I've let the offering baskets pass me by with the optimism and trust that someone else is going to fill it up. But I would urge you in the spirit of today's service to retain that optimism about others, but to also take your own action to fill it up. Unless, of course, you're a new guest here, in which case, please let it pass you by. Will the ushers please pass the baskets out to the congregation? Thank you for your gifts.
I recently finished reading a book by one of my colleagues who's in Bethesda, Maryland. It's titled After the Good News, Progressive Faith Beyond Optimism. And it's a rather good book and is really where a lot of the ideas for today's sermon are drawn from. But I want to start with a quote that my colleague Nancy started the second chapter of her book with. And it's a quote that is by T.S. Eliot, who writes, "They are constantly trying to escape by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good." They are constantly trying to escape by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. Encountering this quote by T.S. Eliot, I can't help but feel a little bit of a familiar feeling vibrate through the strings of my heart. It's a feeling that in my life I have known all too well. And I'm talking specifically about that feeling that many of us have to always do the right thing, to get things just right, to plan so perfectly that in the end, not a single flaw can be found in what we have done. For me, when this feeling comes up, it often takes the form of wanting to say the perfect thing to comfort someone in a hard time, or offer just the right gesture or action that communicates my care. And yet, at the same time that I feel this expectation rising, with it comes a degree of anxiety. It's an anxiety that causes my mind to race a little. What if I say or do something wrong? I have in the past. What if I'm not helpful or am intruding where I'm not wanted? What if I make things worse? What if? What if? What if? These what ifs for me can turn into the freeze portion of the fight, flight, or freeze model of risk assessment that many of us are probably familiar with. And in my observation, it's often these what ifs rooted in the expectation of perfection that keep us from doing the things that we really need to do, from doing the things that we feel called to do. What if? That is, that our own fear of not being perfect keeps us from, as Sean Dennison said in the call to worship, from becoming the relevant, responsive, passionate, and growing movement we yearn to be. So it should be known that, like many of you, at times I am absolutely terrified of failing. Much less terrified of failure than I was years ago. It took some time to get here, and there's still some way to go, but I'm not going to rush it. When I was much younger, in my teens and 20s, for example, this fear was a driving force. So much so that I developed a habit of only doing things that I knew that I was going to be good at. I only did things that I knew I was going to be good at, or things that didn't feel like they were a competition. To give you an example, in 9th grade in high school, I started running track. I did it mostly because many of my friends joined the track team and had encouraged me to join. I had no experience with track before this and enjoyed the practices and being with all my friends, but the idea of competing terrified me. It terrified me so much that I didn't choose the events that I was really interested in, like pole vault, which seemed like an exciting adventure, or even some of the hurdle events, because I was worried that I just wasn't going to be good. And so, as a result of this fear of failing, I decided to participate in things that no one else did. It's hard to fail at running 3,200 meters when you're one of only 3 people running the race. You automatically get third as long as you finish. And as it turns out, this sort of experience is not one that is unique to me. In fact, many people go through similar things, that our fear of failing or not being good enough keeps us from trying the things that we maybe really want to. It keeps us from trying pole vaulting. This dynamic is actually so common among some people, some religious liberal people, that we oftentimes have a belief that my colleague Nancy says, that we believe we are called to perfection, so we don't act, while at the same time believe that we are already basically perfect, because we do the things that are safe, that we're good at. This mark regarding this feature of human life, Nancy really delves into in terms of liberal religious communities, especially Unitarian Universalism. And in her book, she argues that progressive liberal people like us, need to move beyond our fear of failure and discomfort and divorce ourselves from a linear view of progress being infinitely possible. She writes that the story of upward and onward progress that is so prominent in today's progressive churches, one passed down to us from the European Enlightenment tradition, has created privileged religious liberalism in its own image. We become one who we say we are. We expect this story to be true, and we pass it on. Yet, with the continued passage of this progressive story from one generation to another, comes a set of expectations and entitlements that in turn shape the way we live as a people of faith in this beautiful and woe-begone world. End quote. To summarize the additional criticism that Nancy offers of this view of perpetual progress, she says that it generates a collective entitlement to the good life and entrenches its itself in the middle class heart and comes out fighting when its hopes, dreams, ambitions, and dictates are not realized. That there is an idolatry of expectation that drives us in the liberal church. And that it is only when these expectations aren't met that we are willing to come out and fight. Letting this sort of idolatry go unchecked is perhaps the greatest threat to the continued existence of liberal religious churches like ours. There are already places in our society where we have named the false and absurd notion that upward and onward forever is possible. To give you an example from another industry, and Elliot, I didn't ask to share this story, but we're married. For much of the last year, my husband, Elliot, has been working on a merchant marine Federal Reserve ship down in Texas. Basically, this ship's job is to wait there in Beaumont, Texas, in case the federal government needs to move things, whether that's military supplies or humanitarian supplies. But their job is to keep the ship in working order such that on short notice they can deploy to move supplies. As part of this, they're occasionally required to go on sea trials, where they go out and do a proof of concept that the ship can actually run and is being maintained and could respond if called upon. During this proof of concept sea trial, an inspector will come on the ship from the federal government and observe that everything is going as it's expected and that the company fulfilling the contract is actually meeting their end of the deal. During their most recent sea trial, the inspector who came on board gave the crew the order to maintain top speed for 1 hour. And so that's what the crew started to do. They throttled the engines up and were soon pushing towards 20 knots, which is pretty fast for a large vessel. However, as they started to approach this top speed, the inspector told the crew to slow the boat down a little. When asked why, the inspector said that each year during these trials, the boat's speed was expected to increase. As a result, they needed to slow down a little bit and not achieve max speed, so that way next time there would still be room for improvement. The idea that this ship can go progressively faster year after year is frankly not possible. It will reach its limits. Eventually, it will reach a point where just the physics won't allow it to go any faster, or the old engine just can't push anymore. Even the inspector tasked with monitoring this progress knew this was a fact. Why else would he have asked for them to slow down, even slightly, before hitting top speed? In some ways, this situation seems to indicate that the actual goal is to maintain the myth of perpetual progress. Outside of the maritime industry, Reverend Nancy suggests that one way we can check our own motivations is to work to move into proximity with diverse groups of people and expose our assumptions about the world. That when we engage with people of different backgrounds with the same assumptions and are willing to have those assumptions challenged, we find that there are other ways of viewing the world. And that the idea that progress is forever becomes undermined. She says that this proximity is important, and that when we speak to deep, we are confronted with our own desire to give and receive love. When we become personally acquainted with the lives, stories, sufferings, and hopes of those around us, we are morally transformed, not by ideals, but by actual experiences of compassion and conviction. We are not converted to the will to mutuality by intelligence or our learning or inherent motions towards perfection, but by the power and possibility that comes with authentic human relationship. Human relationships are hard, perhaps harder than trying to meet the goals set by the federal government Whenever we engage in the world, in human relationships, there is a risk that we will fail. And this failure can be terrifying. It can be really scary and cause us to want to freeze or not move any further. No one wants to have their imperfections and faults on public display. But we all have them. And no matter who we are or what task we are trying to undertake, we will eventually hit our limit. These limits can be particularly painful when we hit them. When we are working to build proximity-based relationships and we hit these limits, we oftentimes run the risk of causing harm. As we approach these limits in our relational lives, the same series of what-if questions I raised earlier arise. What if I say or do something wrong? What if I'm not helpful? What if I make things worse? What if? What if? What if? In response to these what-ifs, Reverend Nancy says that people like us, liberal religious people in a predominantly white church, that white people in a predominantly white church gradually don't let me start this quote again. She says about these what-ifs that white people in a predominantly white church generally don't like to play games they cannot win. We don't like to follow strategies that we did not set. We don't like to enter vulnerability into work at which we do not like to enter vulnerably into work which we will not definitely succeed. As white leaders in the liberal church, our historic theology and lived experience of privilege have doubly conditioned us to these tendencies, and it too often results in our retreat into defensiveness. Progressive people rarely think that we are part of the problem. There's an assumption that just because we recycle or garden or eat organically or shop at the right stores or do all those things that our values call us to do, that we are somehow a net positive on society rather than a perpetrator of negative dynamics. There's a belief that living such a life is an antidote to these negative forces, when in most cases, these lifestyle choices simply buffer us against the true suffering of others on our planet. This orientation toward life can cause individuals to feel a sense of superiority that keeps us from truly connecting with one another in community, and instead leaves us collectively a collection of individuals who are trying our darndest to put on a good front and maintain our facade of perfection, to maintain our facade of progress. To give you an example of some of this dynamic that has come up in this community, and I'm not naming any names or calling anyone out, just sharing a story. Not long after I arrived at Cedars in a meeting, I mentioned that it is my preference not to have alcohol at church-related events. I am someone in my personal life, I enjoy beer and wine, I'm happy to go out for a drink if someone invites, but I'm also sensitive to the fact that for some people, church is a place where they come to escape the pressure to drink socially, a place where they come when they're in recovery to be in community without that being present. When I explained this in a meeting, an individual in the meeting verbally scoffed and declared, "There's no one at Cedars with a drinking problem." Now, even back then, shortly after arriving, I already knew this wasn't true. People often tell their minister things that they're not ready to share with other people or share at all beyond the confidentiality of pastoral care. And this person assumed that just because they hadn't heard of it, it couldn't be true. We aren't those kind of people, after all. This story is an example of the sort of moral perfection assumed among religious liberals that Reverend Nancy is referring to when she writes, "Liberal religious people not only tend to believe that we are called to perfection, but also believe that we are already basically perfect." It is true that we believe that we have inherent worth and dignity. That is the good news that Nancy is referencing when she says after the good news. That is the news that those of us, our tradition included, who come out of the Protestant tradition, affirm. That's what the gospel means. It's the message that you are worthy. But this principle does not mean that we have inherent goodness or perfection. What it means is that no matter what we do or how we act, our lives still matter. But at the same time, it is up to us to decide whether or not we act for good or evil. We're only human, and as such, are bound to make a mess and at times screw things up. I know I do it all the time. And recognizing this, I believe, is an important part of what it means to be a human, of what it means to be on this journey that we say that we are on. However, when we deny our shortcomings and continue to perpetuate a myth of infinite progress and human perfection, even when this myth has been busted, we do harm. Harm to ourselves, harm to each other, and harm to the wider world. For in doing this, in denying our own imperfections, we remove ourselves from the struggles of the world. And in doing this, set ourselves apart as if a beacon on a hill, rather than a loving and messy community of people who are just trying to navigate life together. Reverend Nancy, in the conclusion of her book, offers two antidotes to helping liberal religious people overcoming this sort of perpetual progress and perfectionism. The first antidote that she offers is one of atonement, one of confession. Not that we need to say we're horrible people, but that we need to be honest about our shortcomings. She says atonement can be a painful and complicated process for liberal worshipers. Sometimes the way we feel about it is deeply affected by our previous religious experiences. Our experiences of guilt and shame or unworthiness. Sometimes the whole thing just seems unpleasant. However, it seems that if we are going to move beyond the perfection and certainty that keeps us from acting, at some point we will need to wrestle with this discomfort and work to name that at times we have fallen short. At times we do fall short and will continue to fall short. And that in sharing this humanity, we are given an opportunity to grow closer together, to seek and grant forgiveness and build deeper bonds. The second antidote that Reverend Nancy offers to religious liberals is an invitation into a practice of lament. Through creating time and space to gather and name the suffering of the world helps to remind us that we are not outside of this suffering or otherwise above the world. Gathering to name the hardships and reflecting on our connection to them is one way we can work to keep ourselves rooted in the struggle and pain of community. It's one way we can keep ourselves rooted in the realities of our life. Both of these antidotes, these practices that Nancy offers, require us to be authentic and vulnerable. They are practices that call us to name the times that we have caused pain and ask for forgiveness. They are practices that invite us into authentic connection with one another and the world and the impact that we have on it, rather than simply ignoring it. Yes, it's true that we will likely get it wrong at times, and that the progress we felt we have made at times will slip back and we'll feel defeated. But that's okay. That's part of what it means to be human. Things cannot go infinitely onward and upward forever. Like the ship, eventually we'll have to start throttling back just to maintain that illusion that year after year things will continue to progress forever. I pray that when we reach those limits, when we reach those failures and name them, we can lament these things together. To gather, to give and grant forgiveness to one another, and continue to remain in proximity with one another. To the glory of life. At this time, I would like to invite us to rise as you are willing and able, and don your masks again as we prepare to sing our closing hymn of the service, hymn number 1021 in our teal hymnal, Lean on Me.
So we will sing this 3 times through as it's written, and then carry it through to the end on the 3rd time.
But if we are wise,
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Our benediction for today comes from one of the liturgies of lament that Reverend Nancy offers at the end of her book. And she writes, "And now those sorrow and pain abide. Let us gather what strength we have, what confidence and valor and faith. For we live to tell the story of our days. And in this telling, as in this weeping, we are not alone. We are not alone, but connected in a mystery and wonder through the veil of our own pain to ourselves, to each other, and to all that remains holy, even in such times as these." Our service has ended, but our service to one another and the world begins anew. As we go forth, may we carry the spirit of community with us. Before we have our prelude, I would like to invite people after the prelude to take a moment before cleaning up the chairs. I'm going to plan to sit over here, and if you need a time for lament or a time to reflect on something, we can gather over here and take a moment to reflect on these things together. So thank you all. And Nick, your post, I guess after the post load.